Theft. Rampo, Edogawa. I have a rather amusing story to tell. It is drawn from my own experience, and if handled properly, it might serve as material for one of your detective novels. Would you like to hear it? You insist I must tell it? Very well, though I am a poor storyteller, and you may find my telling somewhat clumsy, I shall relate it to you. I assure you, it is no fabrication. The reason I stress this at the outset is that I have recounted this tale to others on several occasions, and because it is so curious, almost as though deliberately contrived, most people refuse to believe it. Surely, they say, you've lifted that plot from some novel. But no, it is a genuine incident without the least embellishment. Though now I am engaged in rather disreputable work, up until 3 years ago I was connected with religion, or so it sounds if I put it that way. In truth, it was nothing impressive. It was hardly a faith to boast of. It was called the XX sect. I doubt you've ever heard of it. Think of it as a cousin to the Tenrikyo or Konkokyo sects. Of course, adherents of the sect would argue that there are important distinctions, but for our purposes, that is close enough. The sect did not possess a head temple of grand scale, but its main seat was in XX Prefecture, and in nearly every sizable town of that region stood one of its branch chapels. I belonged to the branch in N City. Among the many branches, the one in N City was considered relatively prosperous. This was thanks to its head, though. The sect had a more elaborate title for the post. Let us call him the director. He was an old acquaintance of mine from the same hometown, and an extraordinarily capable man. Not capable in the sense of spiritual attainment, but gifted with a kind of business acumen. It may sound strange to speak of business sense in religion, but in matters of winning converts and collecting donations, his skill was remarkable. As I said, I entered that branch through my connection with the director some 7 years ago now when I was 27. At the time, I had made a small blunder, lost my job, and was at loose ends. For lack of other options, I decided to board there for a time. In other words, to live as a freeloader. Yet, once I had settled in, I never managed to leave. Bit by bit, I became familiar with the workings of the sect, was entrusted with errands and tasks, and eventually took root as the general factotum of the chapel. In all, I remained there for 5 years. Of course, I never became a believer. My nature lacked religious devotion, and once I had seen behind the curtain, there was little room for faith. The director who delivered solemn sermons with a pious face was, in private, fond of drink, a frequenter of women, and forever quarreling with his wife. For all his skill, he was such a man. As for the followers of the sect, they were another matter altogether. Many were near fanatical, as if possessed by madness. I do not know much about ordinary temples, but these devotees gave with astonishing extravagance. To one like me, without faith, it was bewildering to see them donate so freely, without a trace of regret. Naturally, the director lived in luxury, and even dabbled in speculation with the funds he had wrung from them. Now, I am by nature fickle. I had never held the same job for even 2 years. That I endured for 5 years at the chapel was precisely because the situation proved so comfortable. I myself enjoyed ample gain and ease of life. Then why, you may ask, did I leave so agreeable a post? That is where the story begins. The preaching hall of the chapel had been built some 10-odd years earlier, and by the time I arrived, it was already somewhat dilapidated and shabby. Moreover, since the director had taken charge, the number of believers had increased so suddenly that the place had become rather cramped. He therefore resolved to enlarge the hall and repair its worn parts at the same time, but there was no reserve fund. Even if the headquarters granted some assistance, it could not possibly cover all expenses. The only recourse was to solicit donations from the faithful. The cost of the edition was under 10,000 yen, but for a provincial branch chapel to raise such a sum was no easy matter. Were it not for the director's business acumen, I doubt the enterprise would ever have succeeded. And indeed, the method he employed to gather funds was ingenious, almost fraudulent. He began with the wealthiest believer, a retired merchant of N City, one of the foremost men of business there. With a fabricated story of divine revelation in a dream, he persuaded the old man to make the first contribution, 3,000 yen, if I recall correctly. This, you see, became the bait. He placed the sum in cash inside the chapel's small safe, and whenever another devotee came, he would show it with solemn words. Behold this noble act. So-and-so has already made such a generous offering. Coupled with the fabricated tale of the divine dream, this display left no room for refusal. Each gave according to his means. Some even emptied their savings to prove the strength of their faith. And so, the pile of donations grew before our eyes. It was indeed an easy trade. In only 10 days we had gathered 5,000 yen. At that rate, the director exulted. The entire cost of construction would be in hand within the month. But then, something extraordinary occurred. One day, a most peculiar letter arrived, addressed to the director. Such things may be commonplace in the novels you write, but when such a letter comes in real life, it is unsettling. The message read, "At the stroke of midnight, I shall call to collect the donations now in your possession. Be so good as to have them ready." Imagine, someone had the audacity to announce a burglary in advance. How amusing, don't you think? Silly, even, but at the time it turned me pale. You see, as I mentioned, all the donations were in cash, stored in the safe, and we had flaunted them openly before the believers. Word that the chapel had a great sum on hand had certainly spread to some extent. Who could say it had not reached criminal ears? That a thief might come was not strange, but that he should notify us of the hour was baffling. The director, for his part, dismissed it. Nonsense, just a prank. And indeed, if it were not a prank, no burglar would deliberately give us cause for vigilance. That much was logical. Yet still I could not put my mind at ease. Better safe than sorry, I thought, and urged the director to deposit the money at the bank. He would not hear of it. At last I persuaded him that we should at least notify the police, and he agreed to let me go. That afternoon, as I was on my way to the station, I happened to meet a policeman on patrol, one I recognized from a household registry check a few days earlier. I stopped him and related the whole story. He was a burly fellow with a fine mustache, but at once he burst into laughter. "Ha! Do you really think such a fool of a thief exists? Ha ha! You've been made sport of, that's all. A fine jest." For all his stern face, he was a jovial sort. "All the same," I said, "from our standpoint, it is most unsettling. Could you not, just to be safe, look into the matter?" "Very well," he replied, still laughing. "As it happens, I am assigned to patrol that area tonight. I'll stop by around the appointed hour. No burglar will come, of course, but since it's on my way, have some tea ready, eh?" He took it as a joke, but since he promised to come, I was reassured and made him promise again not to forget. That evening, ordinarily I would have been in bed by 9, unless there was a sermon, but this night I was too uneasy. Remembering the policeman's promise, I prepared tea and sweets and sat waiting in the reception room, the one used for visiting believers, at a desk facing the safe. It was strange. My eyes could not leave that safe, as though I feared the money within might vanish before my very eyes. From time to time, the director would come in and chat idly, perhaps as uneasy as I. The hours dragged on endlessly. At last, close to midnight, the policeman appeared, true to his word. We invited him inside, and the three of us, the director, the policeman, and myself, sat in a circle before the safe, drinking tea as though keeping watch. To be honest, I think I was the only one who truly meant it as watchkeeping. The director and the policeman treated the threatening letter as nothing. The officer was a great talker, and soon had the director engaged in lively debate on religion, as though he had come for that very purpose. Naturally, it was more pleasant to sit drinking tea and arguing than to tramp through the dark streets. I began to feel foolish for being so anxious. After some time, the officer, having had his fill of debate, suddenly glanced at me and said, "Well, it's 12:30 now, you see? It was only a prank." I felt rather embarrassed and replied vaguely, "Indeed. Thanks to you." But then he looked toward the safe. "And the money, is it really in there?" he asked strangely. I felt mocked, and my temper rose. "Of course it's in there. Shall I show you?" I snapped. "No need, but perhaps it would be wise to check, just to be sure." Still joking, but I was nettled now. "Very well, look for yourself," I said, and turned the dial, opened the safe, and drew out the bundles of notes. "Ah, so that is what put your mind at ease," the officer said. I cannot mimic his tone, it was most peculiar. He spoke as though with something stuck between his teeth, smiling slyly all the while. But who knows what means a thief may have? You think that because the money is here, all is safe. But perhaps... He took up a bundle of notes in his hand. Perhaps this already belongs to the thief. At that, a shiver of dread ran through me. It was an uncanny, indescribable feeling. For several long seconds we sat in silence, staring into each other's eyes, each probing the other's thoughts. "You understand now, don't you? Well then, good night," the policeman suddenly said, rising to his feet, still holding the bundle of notes. And in his other hand, drawn from his pocket, was a pistol, which he leveled at us without a trace of negligence. Imagine it, even in that moment he kept the same casual tone. "Good night," he said, as though nothing were amiss. A man of extraordinary nerve. Of course, the director and I just sat there in a daze, unable to utter a sound. We were stunned. It never occurred to us that someone might first make himself familiar by coming around for a household registry check, a new trick indeed. We were utterly convinced he was a real policeman. He went out of the room and I thought he was leaving, but no. He left the sliding door open just a crack and held the barrel of his pistol through the gap, aiming it steadily at us. For a long time it didn't move at all. It was too dark to see clearly, but I felt as though one of the villain's eyes were glaring at us through a slit above the pistol. "Ah, so you've guessed?" "As one would expect from your profession." That's right. He had hung the pistol from a nail with a thin cord, so it looked exactly as though a man were taking aim. But we had no leisure to reason that out. We were filled with one fear that at any moment it might go off with a bang. Only when the director's wife came in and slid open the door with the pistol sticking through did we finally understand. The funniest thing was that the director's wife politely saw the policeman, the thief disguised as one, all the way to the front door. Since there had been no shouting or commotion, she had no idea what had happened in the reception room. As he passed through, the rogue even said, "Sorry to trouble you," as calmly as you please. Do pardon me for not seeing you out." she replied, a little puzzled, and escorted him herself to the entrance. It was laughable. After that, the servants roused from sleep and the house was in an uproar, but by then the thief was surely 10 blocks away. Everyone rushed to the gate without planning it, peering up and down the dark street and wasting time arguing whether he had fled this way or that. It was late at night. The shops on both sides had all shut their doors, and the street was pitch black, lit only here and there by a lonely round lantern, one every 4 or 5 houses. Then, from a side street ahead, a single black figure suddenly emerged and came toward us. It looked to be a policeman. At the sight, I started, thinking the thief had returned to attack us, and without a word I seized the director's arm and pointed. But this time it was a real policeman. Seeing our commotion, he asked what was the matter. The director and I explained that he had come at just the right moment and told him the tale of the theft. He said that chasing after the thief now would be useless, but that he would return to the station at once and have a cordon thrown up. No doubt, he added, the culprit was a fake officer. Dressed like that, he would draw attention and would surely be caught, so we needn't worry. He noted down the amount stolen and the thief's appearance in his notebook and hurried back the way he had come. From his manner of speaking, it sounded as though recovering the money and arresting the thief would be the simplest thing in the world, and we felt heartened and reassured. But matters are never so easy. For days we talked of nothing else. Today, a notice from the police. Tomorrow, the money returned. Yet 5 days passed, then 10, and there was no word at all. The director frequently went to the station to ask for news, but there was no sign of the money coming back. The police are heartless. At this rate, they'll never catch the thief, he grumbled, growing disgusted with their methods. He complained that the head detective was overbearing, that the patrolman who had been so confident now avoided him whenever they met, and so on. Half a month passed, then a month, and still no arrest. The believers held meetings and made a great fuss, but being the sort they were, they had no practical ideas. In the end, what was stolen was stolen. The police would do as they could, and we would begin anew to solicit donations. Thanks to the director's glib tongue, we collected a decent sum, close to the target, and the addition went ahead more or less as planned, but that is beside the point here. Now then, about 2 months after the theft, I had occasion to go to Y-Town, around 20 kilometers from a city. Y-Town had a famous Jodo sect temple, and on the day I arrived, a grand annual sermon had just begun. For 7 days, the whole area around the temple turned festive. Several tents for acrobats and fortune tellers had been set up. Stalls selling foods and toys lined the street. Drums and flutes clanged merrily, quite a tumult. Having finished my business and being in no hurry to return, I let myself be drawn by the cheerful music and voices. It was a tranquil springtime, after all, and wandered into the fairground. I drifted from show to show and stall to stall, peering over shoulders at the crowds. If I recall, it was a crowd gathered around a peddler selling tooth powder. A big fellow was whirling a thick cane and shouting something. I could see him through gaps in the sea of heads. It looked entertaining, so I circled the ring of spectators, searching for a spot with a better view. Then one rustic-looking gentleman among them suddenly turned his head, and the instant I saw his face, I caught my breath and nearly bolted. Why? Because it was the spitting image of our thief. The only difference was that when he had posed as a policeman, he'd worn a full beard from under the nose to his chin, whereas now he was clean-shaven. Perhaps the beard had been false. I was truly shocked. I was poised to run, but observing him more closely, I saw no sign he had noticed me. He had turned back and was listening fixedly to the pitchman. That being so, I left the spot and, from behind the canvas of a nearby Odin stall, watched him from a little distance. My heart was pounding part fear, part the thrill of having found the thief. If only I could trail him, learn his address, and inform the police, and if any portion of the stolen money remained, how delighted the director and the believers would be. The thought made me feel as though I were a character in a play. I was strangely excited. Still, I needed to be sure this man was truly the thief. A mistake would be disastrous. Before long, he left the crowd and began strolling about. He was not alone. There were two of them. I had not noticed, but a man dressed much like him had been standing beside him and proved to be his companion. One or two, it made no difference. I followed at a distance of 4 or 5 meters through the throng, taking care not to be seen. Have you ever tried it? Tailing someone is devilishly hard. If you are too cautious, you lose them. If you try not to lose them, you must risk exposing yourself. It is nothing like the easy business it seems in novels. So when they finally entered a restaurant after walking 2 or 3 blocks, I breathed a sigh of relief. But just then I made another startling discovery. The companion, the one who was not the thief, had a face uncannily like that other policeman, the one who had promised to catch the thief. Wait now, don't say you've solved it already. Even for a novelist, that would be hasty. There's more. Bear with me a little longer. Seeing them go into the restaurant, what did I do? In a novel, I suppose, I would have slipped the maid a coin to be shown to the next room and listened at the sliding door. But here's the absurd part. I didn't have the money to go up into the restaurant at all. In my purse, I had only the return half of my train ticket and, I think, a bit less than 1 yen. And it was all so strange that I couldn't quite resolve to report it to the police. Besides, they might slip away while I was doing that. So, foolishly enough, I kept watch out front, standing guard by the restaurant door. And thinking it over from every angle, I could only conclude that, just as the first policeman who came had been an imposter, so too was the one who arrived afterward, the one who said he would catch the thief. Ingenious, isn't it? The first half of the trick is common enough, nothing special, but the second half, bringing on another imposter right after the first, is exceedingly well contrived. No one imagines the same trick has been doubled, and since the second man is also a policeman, everyone relaxes. This time, he must be genuine. In this way, the real police remain in the dark for much longer, and the thieves have ample time to get far away. Yet when I reasoned thus, another thought struck me. If those two were in league, there was one point that didn't quite add up. Yes, that point. Since the director had kept going to the police station afterward, he would have discovered at once if the second policeman were a fake. At that, I no longer knew what to think. Perhaps an hour passed. At last, the two men emerged from the restaurant, faces flushed. Naturally, I tailed them. They left the fairground and walked toward the quieter outskirts. At one corner they paused, nodded to each other, and separated. I hesitated over which one to follow, but in the end, I chose the man who had carried off the money. In other words, the one I had first recognized. He was tipsy and staggered a little as he headed toward the edge of town. The lonelier it grew, the harder it became to shadow him. Keeping half a block behind, I slunk along under the eaves, jittery. Before I knew it, we were beyond the houses entirely. Ahead lay a small grove with a shrine among the trees, a village tutelary shrine, perhaps, and the man strode straight into it. I began to feel uneasy. Surely he didn't live in there. I nearly gave up and went home, but having come so far, it felt wasteful to stop. I screwed up my courage and followed him into the grove, and just as I set foot among the trees, I froze. The man I thought had gone far ahead suddenly sprang out from behind a thick trunk and planted himself right before me, staring with a sly grin. I braced myself, thinking he might leap at me, but to my astonishment, he spoke as though greeting a friend. "Well, now been a while." Brazen, isn't he? "I've been meaning to pay my respects," he went on. "That was a splendid job the other day. Even I had to hand it to your boss. He put one over on me good and proper. Give him my regards when you get back, will you?" Naturally, I hadn't the faintest idea what he meant. I must have looked utterly baffled. He burst out laughing. "So you were fooled too? Amazing. It was all counterfeit. If the money had been real, there was 5,000 yen. After all, it would have been a tidy haul. But no, every last note was a well-made fake." "Counterfeit? Nonsense!" I shouted. "Ha ha ha, you're startled, I see. Want proof? Look here. 1, 2, 3, 300 yen. I've given the rest away. This is all I have left. Take a good look." Clever work, but fakes, everyone. He pulled 100-yen notes from his wallet, handed one to me, and said, "You followed me to find out where I live because you knew nothing of it. But that'd be bad for your boss, you know. Between the man who swaps the believer's donations for counterfeit and the man who steals them, which is the greater sin? You don't need me to tell you. Best go home and give your boss my message. Tell him I said I'll come by to thank him myself." With that, he strode off. I stood there for a long time, staring blankly at the 300-yen notes in my hand. So that was it. Suddenly everything fit. If those two were in league, there was no surprise. The director's frequent trips to the police had been for show. If he hadn't put on that act, it might have turned into a real police matter. The thief might have been caught, and the counterfeit exposed. No wonder he hadn't been startled by the warning letter. Counterfeit money held no terror for him. I'd thought him a mere schemer, but I hadn't expected this. Perhaps he'd taken a loss in speculation and, to keep up appearances with me and the believers, procured counterfeit notes. Chinese forgers are said to produce excellent work. In hindsight, there were signs. It's remarkable none of the believers ever went to the police. I was angry at my own stupidity for not suspecting it until the thief himself told me. I was out of sorts the whole day after I got home. After that, everything felt wrong. I couldn't very well make public the crimes of an old acquaintance, so I kept quiet, but I could no longer bear to stay. Before, the director was merely a man of loose morals, but once I knew this, I couldn't spend another day there. Soon I found other work, took my leave, and left. I had no wish to be a thief's helper. That's why I quit the chapel. But the story isn't over yet. This is the part that sounds made up. The 300 yen, the counterfeit, supposedly I kept it in the bottom of my wallet as a memento. Later, after I married my wife, is the one I met after moving here. She used one of those notes, not knowing it was counterfeit, to pay the month's bills. It happened to be a bonus month, so even a pauper like me had a bit of cash, and her mistake was understandable. And what do you think? It passed without a hitch. Amusing, isn't it? How do you explain that, you ask? I haven't investigated, so I still don't know. But the fact remains, the 300 yen I had was genuine. The other two notes likewise went used for my wife's spring clothes. Perhaps the thief had stolen the real cash and, to throw me off his trail, palmed off genuine notes while calling them counterfeit. Tossing them away so carelessly when they weren't small sums of 10 or 20 yen would deceive anyone. It certainly fooled me. I took his word for it and never looked closely. If so, then I did the director a grave wrong by suspecting him. And that other policeman, the one who promised to catch the thief, was he real or a fake? My suspicion of the director sprang from seeing that policeman go up to the restaurant with a thief, but now I wonder. Perhaps he was a real officer who later took a bribe, or perhaps, in the line of duty, he had cultivated a relationship with his suspect playing the detective. Given the director's usual behavior, I jumped to conclusions. There are other possibilities too. The thief might have meant to hand me counterfeits, but mistakenly gave me genuine notes. The ending is terribly blurred and untidy, I admit. But if you turn it into a detective story, you can choose whichever version you like. It's entertaining either way. In any case, I bought my wife's spring dress with the money I got from the thief,